Sometimes a single question can crack open a moment, revealing the raw truth hidden beneath polite veneers. Sometimes a quiet stand speaks louder than any shout. And sometimes what begins as a calculated jab ends with a realization that shatters pretense. This is one of those stories, a story about a stage, a microphone, and the unexpected power of an unspoken legacy. It's a moment that resonated far beyond the live stream, becoming a mirror for anyone who's ever had to reclaim their narrative. If this story stirs something in you, if it reminds you of a truth you know, please subscribe to hear more, like this story to help it reach others, and comment with your reflections. Because the most impactful stories are the ones we share, the air in the Austin auditorium was thick with anticipation, though most of it was the manufactured kind, a hum of polite expectation. 8 chairs stood poised on the stage, each one meticulously chosen, each representing a segment of the tomorrow's leaders, today's choices forum. Hosted by a local think tank and broadcast on 3 live stream platforms, the event was pitched as a vibrant blend of young firebrands and experienced voices. The agenda was familiar: hash out differences, showcase vision, perhaps even generate a viral soundbite or two. It was a calculated performance, designed for optics as much as for insight. Near the center, legs crossed with a blazer sharp against her frame, sat Jasmine Crockett. A slim notebook rested in her lap, notes untouched. She rarely needed a script. Her mind was her strongest asset, precise and unflappable. Known for her composure, for the measured weight of her words, Jasmine had learned early that being the only black woman in the room didn't demand volume. It demanded something far more potent, an undeniable presence. To her left sat Karoline Leavitt, younger, visibly eager, almost vibrating with an energy that leaned hard into political one-liners. Karoline wore the kind of smile that dared you to disagree, a carefully constructed expression that stopped just short of rude, but happily pushed the edge of that line, especially when the cameras were rolling. She was there to spark, to react, to dominate. The moderator, a green local radio host from Waco, navigated the opening with predictable questions. Education policy, youth violence, the ubiquitous impact of social media. The answers flowed, a familiar river of political platitudes. We need to have the conversation. Let's bring people to the table. Then came the pivot. We've been talking about young people, he said, his voice shifting, but what about the values they inherit? Who did they come from? What did your parents teach you about leadership? A simple question on the surface, but questions like that cut differently when identity is part of the equation. Karoline grabbed the mic first, a light, almost dismissive chuckle escaping her. I come from strong stock, she declared, her eyes bright with self-assurance. My parents are small business owners in New Hampshire. They taught me to speak my mind and not apologize for it. Jasmine didn't flinch. She knew where this was going. And then it happened. Karoline turned to Jasmine, and with that same audacious grin that never quite reached her eyes, she tossed out the barb. So, Jasmine, where's your mum from? Africa? The room cracked. Not with genuine laughter, not exactly. A few people offered. Hesitant chuckles, the kind of nervous sound emitted when one is unsure if something's supposed to be funny or offensive. One panelist looked down at his notes. The moderator blinked, momentarily unsure whether to intervene. The camera subtly zoomed in, sensing that the carefully managed atmosphere was about to shatter, that something profound and unavoidable was shifting into view. The barb hung in the air, a poisonous dart aimed with casual cruelty. So, Jasmine, where's your mum from? Africa? The nervous chuckles, the averted gazes, the moderator's frozen pause all confirmed the intentional malice behind Karoline's question. Yet Jasmine Crockett, the woman known for her unwavering composure, did not flinch. Not a flicker of surprise. Not a ripple of anger crossed her face. Her stillness was a force in itself, a quiet power that seemed to absorb the insult without internalizing it. She turned slowly, deliberately, towards Karoline. This wasn't a confrontational snap of the head. It was a measured pivot, a forensic gaze. She wasn't just looking at the smiling, confident politician on camera. She was looking at the actual person, the one who thought such a comment was harmless enough to toss out in front of a room packed with journalists, students, and elected officials, a room meant for dialogue, not derision. But before Jasmine could even part her lips, before the calculated weight of her first word could enter the charged atmosphere, something else happened. Something entirely unscripted, profoundly organic. From the very back of the room, beyond the last row of audience chairs, past the tech tables cluttered with cables and the silent, watchful camera crew, a woman stood up. She had been seated quietly, alone, throughout the forum, her hands resting calmly in her lap. A maroon shawl, rich and deep, was draped over her shoulders, its fabric a stark contrast to the sterile auditorium lighting. Her hair, streaked with silver like a canvas painted by time, framed a face that held the wisdom of decades. No one had paid her much attention earlier. She hadn't sought it. She didn't speak now. She didn't glare. She didn't gesture. She simply stood. Her chin was held high, her posture erect, and her presence, though silent, immediately shifted the very air in the room. It was as if an invisible anchor had dropped, steadying a chaotic ship. Suddenly, every eye in the auditorium, from the front row of eager students to the seasoned panelists, swiveled. They looked not at Karoline, the instigator. They looked not at Jasmine, the target. They looked at the woman standing silently in the back, her stillness magnetic, profound. Jasmine didn't need to turn to look. She didn't need to verify. She already knew. A profound, instinctual knowing settled deep within her. That was her mother. The same woman who had patiently sat through every single one of Jasmine's high school debate team meetings, offering silent encouragement from the back row. The woman who had once worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, yet still found the energy to iron her daughter's shirts at her M for school. The woman whose voice, calm yet firm, had instilled in Jasmine the most crucial lesson of her life: make them listen without raising your voice. The silence stretched, not empty, but heavy. It was a tangible thing, focused, alive. Karoline, suddenly unsure of herself, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, a nervous cough catching in her throat. Her earlier confident smirk had evaporated, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. People were still staring at Jasmine's mother, still standing at the back, still not saying a word, no eye roll, no frown, just standing, as if a page from a living history book had suddenly materialized. Slowly, meticulously, Jasmine lifted the microphone. For the first time that evening, her voice was about to enter the room, and what she was about to say would silence every side conversation and make Karoline Leavitt wish she had never opened her mouth. The silence in the auditorium was no longer merely quiet. It was a living thing, charged with anticipation, heavy with unspoken questions. Every eye remained fixed on Jasmine's mother, still standing in the back, a sentinel of quiet strength. Karoline, visibly unnerved, fidgeted in her seat, her early confidence shrinking under the collective gaze. It was a temperature drop in the room, an almost physical shift, even though the air conditioning hummed steadily. This silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a profound, focused attention, waiting for the inevitable. Jasmine, holding the microphone close, allowed the moment to settle, to truly press upon everyone present. She didn't rush. Her voice, when it finally came, was steady, almost impossibly calm, yet it resonated with an authority that commanded instant attention. "I could answer your question," she said, her eyes, clear and unblinking, locking onto Karoline's. "But that would mean accepting the way you asked it." Karoline shifted again, her attempt to hold onto her smug smile failing, thinning into a tight, nervous line. Her hands, once casually crossed, were now clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white. Jasmine continued, her voice unwavering, "You asked where my mother is from, not because you care about her story, but because you thought it would reduce mine." The moderator, a seasoned professional, remained perfectly still. He knew better than to intervene now. The story was no longer his to control. "She's from Tuskegee, Alabama," Jasmine declared, her gaze never leaving Karoline's, a statement delivered not as a defense, but as an education. "Not Africa. Though if she were, I'd say it just the same with pride. But you didn't ask because you didn't know. You asked because you assumed she didn't belong in this conversation." A ripple of quiet acknowledgement passed through the audience. People were leaning in now, not passively listening, but actively absorbing every word. Some forgot to blink. The back rows, which had previously held a gentle murmur of conversation, had gone completely silent. Jasmine's voice, though not raised, began to weave a tapestry of resilience. She cleaned houses in high school to help feed her younger siblings. She waited tables at a diner where the owner made her use the back entrance. A soft, collective hum could be heard from a few members of the crowd, a sound of understanding, of shared recognition. She raised me while working night shifts as a nurse and still managed to volunteer at every PTA meeting. Then, with a gentle turn of her head, Jasmine finally looked toward the back of the room. And she's sitting right there, she added, her voice softening just a fraction, standing actually. All eyes in the auditorium followed hers, drawn once more to the woman. Jasmine's mother still hadn't moved. She didn't wave, didn't acknowledge the sudden spotlight. She simply stood, proud and unyielding. That woman, Jasmine's voice, grew slightly firmer, imbued with a deep, personal reverence, taught me that dignity doesn't require a stage or a MIC or even a response. Karoline gave a nervous, almost imperceptible laugh, too late, too out of sync with the gravitas of the moment. My mother, Jasmine continued, survived what she did so I could sit in this chair today, so I could answer foolish questions with real stories, so I could remind you and everyone watching that who you are doesn't come from a zip code or a skin tone or how perfectly you perform for people who already made up their minds. She paused, letting the profound weight of her words settle. She's not from Africa, Jasmine concluded, her voice a quiet thunder. She's from strength, a beat passed, then another, and that was when it truly hit the room. This wasn't a clapback. It wasn't a moment of getting even. It was clarity. The kind that strips away pretense and leaves only truth. The kind that doesn't need volume to make an impact. Karoline blinked quickly, reached for her water bottle, but knocked it slightly instead, a soft clink against the metal table. She attempted a chuckle, but it didn't land. It wasn't cruelty that shut her down. It was the absolute, unyielding absence of it. Jasmine hadn't gone for the throat. She had simply told the truth, and the truth, unadorned, needed no sharpening. An older woman from Fort Worth, a panelist who had been observing with quiet intensity, looked over at Jasmine and gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't approval. It was respect, the kind that says, that was earned. The moderator, sensing the profound shift in the room, tried to reclaim control. Thank you for sharing, Congresswoman, I think there's, but he didn't finish. Jasmine leaned forward again, her fingers still wrapped around the microphone, her grip not aggressive, but steady, controlled. She wasn't done yet. Now that the silence had spoken its piece, it was time for her to articulate why it continued to echo in rooms like this, in conversations that often remained superficial. You know, she said calmly, her voice just loud enough to carry, reaching every corner of the silent auditorium. People like to throw around the word diversity on panels like this, especially when there are cameras. They want us here. They just don't want to be changed by what we say. She wasn't looking at Karoline anymore. Her gaze swept over the audience, the students, the educators, the policy wonks. Some had leaned so far forward they seemed poised to fall from their seats. Some weren't even blinking. The back rows, utterly silent now, were a testament to the spell she had cast. And when you ask a question like that, Jasmine continued, her eyes settling briefly back on Karoline, you're not just trying to be funny. You're testing boundaries, seeing how far you can go without consequences. Because you assume I won't respond in a way that makes you uncomfortable. Her voice didn't rise, but her words did something else entirely. They pressed. They stayed in people's minds, leaving an indelible imprint. My mum used to tell me, your silence will be misunderstood more than your voice will ever be respected, but she also told me, choose the moment when you speak. Make it cost something. A young man in the front row, perhaps a college freshman, nodded almost imperceptibly and whispered to the person next to him, this is real. Jasmine kept going. I'm not here because I want people to like me. I'm not here to make everyone feel comfortable. I'm here because I worked for it, and my mother, she sacrificed for it. And when someone tries to flatten her story into a punchline, I owe her more than silence. She glanced at Karoline again, a look that wasn't accusatory, but deeply knowing. But let me tell you something about that woman standing back there. She wasn't born with much, but she had a spine made of steel. She raised me in a house where we didn't always have heat in winter, but we had books. We had values. We had conversations, not always polite ones, real ones. She turned back to the audience. And that's what leadership looks like. Not tweets, not smug one-liners, but knowing when to speak, knowing when to let silence say enough. Someone clapped. Just one person at first, then a few others joined in. It wasn't a roar, not organized, but it was honest. A ripple of genuine human agreement. Jasmine lightly raised her hand to quiet. Them. Don't clap for me, she said. Clap for her. She's the reason I'm up here. And she did it without ever needing to embarrass someone to make herself look better. The attention turned back to her mother, who still hadn't moved. But now her presence felt like something else entirely, not just silent strength, but something sacred. Jasmine's tone softened slightly, a narrative drawing deeper into memory. She told me stories about walking miles to school, about working as a teen and sending half her pay home to help her grandmother, about men who underestimated her and women who tried to box her in. And still, she never stopped showing up. Karoline hadn't spoken again. Her expression was unreadable now, not angry, not smug, just unsure, like someone realizing she had walked into a moment she couldn't control. And that's what today's youth need, Jasmine said, bringing it back, drawing a line between the personal and the universal. Not just plans and programs and promises, but real models. People who don't flinch when someone tries to minimize them. People who carry legacy without bitterness. She leaned back, finally, just slightly. I didn't come here to teach anyone a lesson, she concluded, but sometimes the lesson shows up whether you're ready or not. The most powerful part wasn't what Jasmine had just said, but what she was about to reveal next about her mothers. Past a truth none of them saw coming. Jasmine sat back, finally resting her voice. The mic was still in her hand, but she wasn't speaking now, not because she had run out of things to say, but because the weight of what she was about to share needed space around it. She looked at her mother, still standing. She's quiet now, Jasmine said, but she wasn't always. A few people leaned in again, unwilling to let this moment pass. It was like watching someone open a door you didn't realize had been locked your whole life. My mother, her name is Althea Josephine Grant, grew up in Tuskegee in the 1960s. A hush fell over the crowd. She went to a school where her textbooks were hand-me-downs from the all-white school across town. She once told me about a book she got in 3rd grade that had property of Jefferson High written in faded ink on the inside cover. Pages were torn, answers already scribbled in. She didn't complain. She read it twice. Jasmine's voice cracked just a little, enough to make it human, to make the story raw. She was 12 when she watched her father, my grandfather, get turned away from voting. Not because he wasn't eligible, but because they told him the ballot box had already closed even though it hadn't. She never forgot that. She told me, "You'll vote for the both of us one day." When she was 16, Jasmine continued, she marched in Montgomery. She wasn't looking for headlines. She marched because the school cafeteria ran out of milk for the black students 3 days a week, while the white school down the street had extra cartons to throw out. She said, "That's enough to march for." People weren't shifting in their chairs anymore. They were utterly still. Jasmine placed the mic down on her lap for a second, then picked it back up again slowly. She married young. My father was in the army. He passed when I was 8. She never remarried. Never had time. She worked, always worked. Nights, weekends. You know how people say single mothers are strong, like it's a compliment? It wasn't strength she chose. It was survival. She glanced at Karoline for a heartbeat. That woman back there never asked for a stage. She never got recognition. She didn't do it for praise. She did it because she knew the world wasn't built for people like her to succeed. But she was going to make sure her daughter had a chance anyway. The moderator, to his credit, didn't speak. He just let the story keep flowing. Jasmine had told her story, her mother's story, a narrative that wove resilience and a profound, quiet strength. The moderator, still respectful, chose not to interrupt the flow, recognizing the sacredness of the moment. "She taught me how to check the oil in a car," Jasmine continued, her voice gaining a quiet force, "and how to argue my way through a tough classroom. She once told me, always tell your story before someone else tells it for you. That's why I'm talking now." She paused again, not for drama, but for emphasis. "I know what it looks like when someone thinks they're making a harmless joke. They toss it out there and wait for you to flinch. And if you don't, they try to make you feel like you're the problem for not laughing along. But we've done that for too long, letting it slide, laughing it off, dimming ourselves." Jasmine's eyes met her mother's. And then, for the first time, her mother finally moved, just slightly. She lowered her head in acknowledgement, not approval, just knowing. "I come from a woman who knew what it meant to fight quietly," Jasmine said, who knew that the biggest protest she could make was to keep showing up, fully herself, no apologies. The audience was still hanging on her every word. Even those who had come purely for politics were now locked into something else, something deeply personal, universally human. She never wanted me to be angry, Jasmine said. She wanted me to be clear. Clear about who I am, where I come from, and why I never, ever let people like you, she gestured lightly toward Karoline, who was now a portrait of discomfort, try to shrink my story for their amusement. But Jasmine wasn't just talking for herself anymore. What came next would remind everyone in that room what happens when generations carry truth through silence and storms. There's this idea, she said evenly, turning her full attention back to Karoline, that ignorance gets a free pass if it comes dressed as a joke. Some people call it humor, sarcasm. They say, relax, it's not that deep, but it is. It always is. Because people like my mother live through the consequences of other people's jokes. Karoline tried to meet Jasmine's gaze but blinked away. Her smile was long gone. I've sat in rooms, Jasmine continued, where men in suits asked me where I learned to speak so well. I've been at dinners where someone called my braids urban chic, and I've had to decide right there, do I speak up or do I keep the peace and let it slide? She glanced around the room slowly, deliberately. We all make that choice every day, especially when we've been told since childhood to pick our battles wisely. But I've learned something. Silence isn't peace. It's permission, a low murmur of agreement from the back. When you asked where my mum is from, she said to Karoline, you weren't looking for an answer. You were hoping for a reaction, maybe something to clip and share later, something that made you look bold. She let the words hang there. But, see, boldness isn't saying something offensive and waiting for applause. Boldness is owning what you say when it falls flat. And it did. A quiet ripple passed through the audience. I'm not interested in cancelling you. Jasmine's voice was steady. I'm not here to win points. I don't need you to apologize. What we need, is for you to understand that your joke landed on a history you don't carry. Karoline shifted, her hands clasped even tighter. She looked toward the moderator, then quickly down at her notes, though it was clear she wasn't reading. You know what's hard? Jasmine asked the room. Raising a daughter in a world that pretends to be post-racial but still checks your name twice on a job application. You know what's even harder? Watching someone diminish your mother's existence to a punchline in front of strangers and cameras just to stir the pot. The room was utterly still. She didn't come here today to be seen, Jasmine said, glancing again toward the back, but now that she's standing, I want everyone in this room to remember that image, a woman who didn't speak a word, but still said everything. There was something gentle in Jasmine's tone now, not soft, but unshaken. You can disagree with my politics all day. That's fine. That's expected. But when you come for someone's roots, when you try to turn heritage into a gag line, you're not debating policy. You're reminding people like me that we're still being asked to prove we belong. A policy analyst on the panel gently placed his mic down, a silent act of surrender. I've learned, Jasmine concluded, that you don't have to raise your voice to hold your ground, and you don't have to clap back to reclaim your place. You just have to tell the truth and let it sting where it needs to. A woman in the second row wiped her eyes. I'm not here to make you feel bad, Jasmine said, addressing Karoline directly, but I do hope you feel something. Because if you don't, then we haven't gotten anywhere. But Jasmine wasn't finished yet. What she said next would draw a line between those who show up for the photo and those who show up for the work. The silence wasn't just polite now. It had shifted into something heavier, like everyone was afraid to breathe too loud. Jasmine hadn't shouted, hadn't even raised her voice, but she had taken control of the room with nothing more than truth, precision, and presence. Even the moderator, pen frozen, sat still. Karoline sat stiffly, her confident smile gone, replaced by a blankness, a hesitation. She glanced around for cues, support, but none came. Jasmine leaned back slightly, not gloating. She glanced toward her mother again. Althea hadn't sat down. Her stance hadn't changed, and somehow, her silence had become the emotional anchor of the entire event. Some of y'all might think I'm being too sensitive, Jasmine said, looking out into the audience again, that I should have just laughed and moved on. But see, that's what's expected. That's how these things get passed down, unchecked. A few heads nodded. People were no longer spectators. They were participants now. I've spent years walking into rooms like this, she said, where I knew I'd have to work twice as hard just to be seen as qualified. And then on top of that, I had to smile through the sideways comments, the coded language, the fake compliments, wrapped in questions. Karoline picked up her pen, hoping to look busy, but the room saw her. When you're used to controlling a narrative, it's hard to sit quietly when it turns on you. Someone raised a phone to record, not for clout, but because they knew they were witnessing something that needed to be remembered. A young woman whispered, "That's leadership." "You don't have to be loud to shift a room," Jasmine said to the Sandiego panelist. "You just have to mean what you say and understand the weight behind it." Then she turned back to Karoline, her tone firm but not cruel. "I'm not asking you to apologize to me. That would be too easy. I'm asking you to think about the space you take up and the way you use your platform. Because one sentence from you can reinforce years of stereotypes, or it can challenge them." Karoline gave a slight, reflexive nod, not acknowledgement, but a sign the moment had moved on without her. The moderator cleared his throat, trying to re-enter. "Let's open the floor for questions from the audience," he offered, but Jasmine leaned forward. "Before we do," she said, "I want to say one more thing." The moderator sat back. Everyone waited. "We talk a lot about being future-focused," Jasmine said. "We tell young people to dream big, speak up led. But what are we really modeling for them if the minute they walk into the room, we still try to box them in with ignorance disguised as humor?" That hit harder than anything so far. A few claps, louder this time. "We can't keep saying you can be anything while still laughing at where people come from. That's not leadership. That's just showmanship." She placed the mic down, not out of weakness, but as punctuation, a final note in a well-played song. But even with everything said, the moment wasn't over yet, because Karoline's next move would speak louder than any words ever could. For the first time in nearly an hour, Karoline looked like she wanted to disappear. Her arms were crossed. Now, her grip on her elbows almost like armor. Jasmine hadn't yelled, hadn't insulted her, but somehow that made it worse. People weren't looking at Karoline as an opponent. They were looking at her like a reminder of how easy it is to speak without thinking, to joke without understanding, to jab at something sacred and then act surprised when it draws blood. She reached for her water bottle again, her hand trembling slightly. She took a sip, trying to buy a moment, but the moment had already passed her by. Jasmine had let her words do what they needed to do. There was no afterburn, no need to drag it further. She had said what she came to say, and now the silence around. Karoline spoke louder than any mic. The moderator tried to resume normal programming. "All right, we'll take a few questions from the audience," he said, his voice thinner than before. A woman in the audience raised her hand, but everyone's attention was already shifting to Karoline. She stood slowly, tried to fix her blazer, smoothed her hair behind one ear. She wasn't angry, not visibly, but her expression had changed into something unreadable, like a person searching for an exit that wouldn't draw more attention, but knowing it was too late for that. She leaned toward the moderator and whispered something. He nodded. That's when people knew she was leaving. No excuse, no explanation. She simply gathered her things, notes, phone, the half-empty bottle, and walked toward the side stairs. No one blocked her path. No one called after her. They just watched. Even the cameraman followed her briefly before turning back toward the panel, unsure if the story had left with her or was just beginning. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't glance at her. Her focus remained on the crowd, on the students in the second row, on her mother still standing tall in the back like a sentry. Karoline descended the side steps quietly, her heels hitting the floor of the auditorium harder than expected, sharp, quick taps that sounded more dramatic than intended. She exited through the left side door, not a slam, not a rush, just gone. Someone whispered, "Wow," another said, "She really left," but nobody chased the moment. It just lingered behind like smoke after a match burns out. The moderator cleared his throat again, this time less sure. "Let's take our next question." A young woman, no older than 19, stood up slowly with a notebook in her hand. "This question is for Congresswoman Crockett," she said. "How do you stay centered when you know you've just been targeted?" Jasmine looked at her for a long second. She didn't rush the answer. "I remember who I'm really talking to," she replied. "It's not always the person who threw the insult. Sometimes it's the people watching, wondering what they would have done in my shoes. Sometimes it's the young woman in the crowd asking the hard questions. That's who I speak to." She smiled gently. "And that's how I stay centered. I speak through it, not because of it." a few claps, a few nods, and this time, no awkward glances. Althea, her mother, finally began to sit back down slowly, like the moment had passed, and the weight she had carried quietly all night could finally rest. Jasmine caught her eye and gave her a tiny nod, just for her. A shared code between women who have been through enough moments like this to recognize when one finally lands the way it's supposed to. But the most unforgettable moment hadn't happened yet, because as the questions continued, Jasmine's final message would bring everything full circle, and it wouldn't be hers alone. The auditorium had shifted. You could feel it in the way people breathed slower now, in the way questions were asked less performative, more genuine. Something about what had just happened made the whole room drop its guard. A college senior stood to ask the next question. Her voice shook a little, but she pushed through. "I just wanted to say," she said, "I've never seen someone handle something like that with so much grace. I didn't grow up seeing women who looked like me speak like that. So thank you." Jasmine didn't smile right away. Instead, she took a deep breath, eyes warm but focused. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "But don't thank me for doing what should have never been necessary in the first place." That landed. People didn't clap this time. They just let it sit. Jasmine looked down at her hands, then back to the crowd. "I've been on panels where people talked over me, ignored me, or called me articulate like it was a surprise," she said. "But what I want young people to understand is this: you don't have to match ignorance with anger. You don't even have to match it at all. You just have to keep showing up as yourself unapologetically." She turned to the moderator now, speaking more broadly. "We talk about leadership like it's something polished, like it wears a certain suit or speaks a certain way or has a certain pedigree. But the truth is, most of the best leaders I know never had a platform. They led from their kitchens, from the back of church buses, from hospital break rooms, from library steps. They led without being asked." Her voice was calm again, controlled, like she was landing the plane. "My mother didn't have a college degree," Jasmine said, glancing at the back of the room again, "but she gave me everything a degree can't teach: discipline, self-respect, and the ability to walk through rooms that weren't built for me and still take up space." People were nodding now. Some whispered to each other, a few just stared ahead, not wanting to miss a word. "And what I want to say to every young person watching," Jasmine added, "is this: don't wait to be invited. Don't wait to be approved. Just show up. Show up for your truth. Show up for your story. And when someone tries to reduce you to a stereotype, you don't have to yell. Just tell the truth loud enough to be remembered." There was a pause. Then, for the first time since standing, her mother finally spoke. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need a microphone, but the room heard her just the same. "She was born with a voice," Althea said. "I just made sure she never forgot how to use it." It was only one sentence, but it felt like scripture. Gasps, a few hands went to hearts, a few eyes welled up. It wasn't dramatic, it was honest. Jasmine smiled this time, fully, freely. She looked at her mother with something close to awe. "I never forgot," she said softly. The moderator cleared his throat again, but this time he didn't speak. He just nodded toward Jasmine, signaling the moment belonged to her. She leaned into the mic one last time. "This wasn't about politics," she said. "This was about legacy, and the kind of world we want to leave behind. One where respect isn't conditional, and silence isn't the price we pay for visibility." The audience rose, not abruptly, but all together, not because they were told to stand, but because they knew something sacred had just happened. Applause erupted, not wild, not desperate, just full, real. Jasmine stepped back. Her mother finally made her way down the side aisle, slow and steady. When they met near the edge of the stage, they embraced briefly, tightly. No words needed, but before the lights dimmed and the cameras turned off, one final reflection would make this more than just a moment. It would become a message worth carrying forward. The auditorium emptied slowly. Nobody rushed for the doors. Nobody checked their phones. People lingered in the aisles, half whispering, eyes still drawn toward the stage as if trying to process what had just happened. The tech crew at the back lowered the lights gradually, giving the room time to breathe. Panelists packed their notes quietly. Some shook hands, others walked out in reflective silence. But Jasmine stayed. She stood at the edge of the stage, beside her mother, their hands briefly clasped. It wasn't performative. It wasn't for the cameras. It was just two women, one who had built the foundation, and the other who had stood on it when it mattered. Most, a student reporter approached gently, notebook in hand, voice unsure. "Can I ask just one question, Congresswoman?" Jasmine turned, still calm. "Sure," she said. The student cleared her throat. "What do you hope people take from today?" Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't think too long. "That silence isn't always safety," she said. "And dignity isn't silence. Sometimes it's standing up without saying a word. Other times, it's speaking when it's hardest not to be right, but to be real." She smiled, not the kind meant for press photos, but the kind you give when something hard is behind you and you know you carried it well. Then she stepped off the stage. By the next morning, the clip had already circulated. Not the whole panel, just that one exchange. Karoline's question, Jasmine's pause, her mother rising, the response. It spread because it wasn't outrage. It was clarity. It wasn't explosive. It was clean, sharp, felt. People watched it again and again, not for the drama, but for the way Jasmine didn't flinch, for the way her mother didn't speak but still spoke volumes. And yet, the clip didn't tell the whole story. Not the weight in the room, not the way Karoline's absence echoed louder than her words, not the way Jasmine's truth stayed in people's thoughts long after the video ended. In Kansas City, a black mother showed the clip to her teenage daughter over breakfast. In Albuquerque, a community college professor played it before class and asked her students what respect really looks like. In Toledo, a young woman saved the video to remind herself how to hold her ground with grace. This wasn't just a moment, it became a mirror. Because the truth is, everyone has their version of that stage. Everyone has been Jasmine at some point. And unfortunately, many have also sat silently when they saw a Karoline in the room say something that didn't sit right. But what Jasmine showed wasn't just strength, it was direction. She didn't cancel anyone. She didn't humiliate anyone. She simply told the truth and let the room do the rest. And her mother, Althea, without a speech, without credentials, reminded us all that sometimes your greatest act of resistance is just standing there, refusing to shrink, refusing to play along. That's the legacy Jasmine spoke from. That's the legacy we should all be trying to build. So here's the question I'll leave you with: when the moment comes and will you stay seated or will you stand? Will you crack a joke to stay comfortable? Or will you listen and learn something uncomfortable that makes you grow? Because someone will always be watching, a daughter, a student, a stranger in the back row. So speak truth even if your voice shakes. And when you do, don't do it for applause. Do it so someone else watching knows they can do it too. If this story meant something to you, if it sparked a realization or ignited a sense of purpose, please like this post. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, who needs to know they're not alone. Comment below with your thoughts and what resonated most deeply with you. And subscribe for more stories that challenge the way you see the world, stories that remind you of the quiet power of truth. Because the next moment might not happen on a stage. It might happen in your living room, at work, in line at the grocery store. And when it does, make it count.